Hello, I'm Clive Couldwell. Welcome to this week's live edition of Analysis. In the programme this week, we talk to John Davey at the Cable Authority about the future for cable companies hoping to offer telephone services. Telepoint is 1 year old, has the day of the mobile communicator yet to arrive. And in the studio we talk to Harry Everett about OS2 and the future for networking. But first, the news. Two big stories this morning: ICL being taken over by Fujitsu and Capgemini Sogeti buying out Hoskins. But first, the second of the two stories, the Capgemini buyout. Europe's biggest computer services group, Capgemini, has swallowed up Hoskins, the UK's largest services group, for £199 million. The deal will give CGS 69.5% of Hoskins' share capital, with an option to buy the remaining shares in 1993. CGS intends to keep Hoskins as an independent business operating autonomously and keeping its stock exchange listing until at least the end of 1992. The agreed bid has been welcomed by Hoskins' board. The deal puts an end to 18 months of uncertainty over Hoskins' future following the acquisition of its parent company, Plessey by GEC and Siemens. Hoskins' current chairman, Jeff Unwin, will remain with the company with 3 CGS directors, including chairman Sergey Kampf, who joins the Hoskins board. With me to discuss the implications of the move is Simon Hill, Computer Weekly. Good morning, Simon. Welcome. Thanks for coming in this morning at short notice. CGS is very much the last of a long line of buyers for Hoskins.
That's right.
What's so special about CGS?
Well, they are Europe's biggest. They're a $700 million pound company themselves. Buying Hoskins takes them up to the £1 billion mark. It won't mean a great deal for Hoskins customers in the UK. They won't see a great deal of difference, but CGS has been very predatory. It has £500 million to spend on acquisitions. This has eaten up 200 million of that. It's going to make them a very competitive player, especially in the light of companies like AT&T buying Istel last year. Companies got to be very big to compete in Europe nowadays. Small companies aren't going to last. And the fact that Hoskins, which is our biggest, has been taken up is case in point.
What sort of benefits does Hoskins bring to CGS?
They are best known for their facilities management work. That is, they've been around for 25 years, and right through that time that's been their forte. CGS doesn't have such a strong presence either in the UK or the FM market, so it's rather to CGS's benefit buying Hoskins. It will give CGS a presence in the FM market over here and the UK market, but it also enable Hoskins to break into the European market where they haven't had such success.
How will the market and the industry react to the news this morning of the takeover?
I think firstly they will look at the price and think it was a pretty good price that CGS has paid. When the deal was, when GEC and Siemens put Hoskins on the market in January, people were talking 350 million. 200 million looks a bargain at that price. But I think for Britain it's sad. We've lost one of our oldest and best known and most profitable computer services companies to the French. Hopefully it keeps them independent. It will make them European now.
Of course, following that tack leads us very nicely onto the ICL news that broke really this morning in all the papers about Fujitsu taking a major stake in ICL. That's going to cause a bit of a stink, isn't it?
Again, I wouldn't. It's only speculative at the moment, and it is likely to be announced when ICL's interims are announced in a week or so. It is likely to cause a stink because ICL is a British company and supplies a lot of systems to government. They are by far the most profitable part of the STC group, which owns them.
Is it just a very, very cheap way for Japan to get into Europe then, presumably?
It depends what they end up paying. People are rumouring, the FT this morning rumours about £1 billion. I don't know whether that's a cheap way of getting in. Fujitsu and ICL have a strong relationship technologically on the mainframe side, on the Series 39. Other Jap companies have come in and bought up Apricot's hardware division.
we'll have to see really how the deal develops and whatever. It's due to hit the fan next week, isn't it? But
that's right. Yes.
We'll see how it goes. Simon Hill from Couldwell Weekly, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, over to Ken.
British Telecom is targeting home workers in a 1 million television advertising campaign. BT says it has identified some 500,000 executives who work from home and a further 1.5 million who bring work home with them. Forecasts suggest that as many as 4 million people may be working from home by 1995.
US networking systems supplier Corvus has been rescued from the verge of bankruptcy by one of its founders, Carl Berg. Corvus was protected by Chapter 11 of the US Bankruptcy Code from 1988, but says it no longer needs the protection after being bought by Berg & Berg. Ironically, it was Berg who forced Corvus to seek protection in the first place after a dispute over a property leasing deal. Berg has now written off its $3.5 million debt from Corvus and settled the company's other creditors.
Concerns are growing over possible health effects of mobile telephones. The standard setters of the Digital European Cordless Telephone System, DECT, have placed stringent safety requirements on the placing of aerials in offices. DECT forms the basis for the cordless office phone system of the future. The safety ruling demands that aerials, which emit frequencies close to that used by microwave ovens, be placed at least 2 meters away from people. The European Telecommunications Standard Institute has called for further research, and they'll host the first major conference on the biological effects of radio frequencies in October.
The US developers of the Unix operating system have moved on to pastures new with the launch of a new system for distributed computing. Called Plan 9 after a cult 1950s sci-fi movie, the new system is intended for distributed computing using different processors and terminals connected by a single file-oriented protocol. Dennis Ritchie, one of the original AT&T team which developed Unix, unveiled the new system at the Unix user group meeting in London. Plan 9 is not seen as a successor to Unix, but some of his ideas may be taken up in the future.
The future of UK voice networks may be in doubt following a European Commission announcement. The EC is backing a Franco-German initiative to develop a pan-European inter-PABX signalling standard. The standard ensures that private telephone exchanges can talk to each other. EC official Jürgen Richter says there could be a standstill imposed on the UK's proprietary standard known as DPNSS. This would effectively halt its development. The Commission has announced its backing for the Alcatel and Siemens promoted IPNS specification.
ICL Chairman Peter Bonfield has called for European member states to work together and develop a common IT strategy. Bonfield believes the IT industry should begin to define and refine policy options in research and development, demonstration projects and standards. Bonfield was speaking at a House of Commons meeting hosted by the British Computer Society. He said experience showed no one company or country could meet all the IT needs of a knowledge-based industrial society.
West German businessmen are turning to cellular telephones for business communications in the East. Frustrated by poor phone links in the East, they're using cellular links for voice, fax and data files. The lines are so busy in Berlin, Leipzig and along the former border area that the Bundespost Telekom has been cutting off calls after 5 minutes. And 2 East Bloc PTTs look set to join the Western Europe's PTT Forum, the CEPT. Hungary announced last year that it was interested in joining, and now CEPT officials say Poland has also applied. Both look likely to be formally accepted as members at the meeting of the CEPT in September.
Users of IBM's MVS ESA operating system can expect improved program management with the launch of a new version of its CICS transaction processing software. IBM has upgraded the 20-year-old package to include support for the C programming language, though the upgrade falls short of full compatibility with IBM's systems application architecture. Version 3.1.1 of CICS has been designed with separate internal areas called domains, which make it more reliable while at the same time reduce service costs.
A Franco-German consortium is to use the emerging ISDN network to distribute tourist catalogues to travel agents. The consortium, which includes IBM and the French and German PTTs, says that tour operators have already expressed an interest in the scheme, which will go live sometime in 1992.
An application to site a telepoint base station on a petrol station forecourt has been refused by an unnamed London local authority. The action has been taken in consultation with the Health and Safety Executive. The HSE says that there is a danger that a telepoint phone could be dropped, causing a spark, or that drivers will use their phones while filling up with petrol. Barry Moxley, managing director of one of the 4 telepoint services, PhonePoint, says that the safety fears are unfounded and will be vigorously opposed by all telepoint operators. The ruling comes as a further blow to the 4 telepoint operators who nearly a year after opening shop have fewer than 2,000 users. Ken Young has been out looking at the market and the people who might be using these new phones.
This is a telepoint phone. It's small, lightweight, and easy to use whenever you're in reach of a base station. It's been available for about a year now, but critics say with only about 1,000 subscribers, it's a failure because base stations are too hard to find and it's really not worth the money.
It's a portable phone that works off these cell point things.
Right.
I've heard a bit about it, but not much really.
Do you know that it's actually different from a cellular phone?
Yeah, I mean, I understand you can't receive calls with them, which I think in a way defeats the purpose, because if I was out and about and I wanted to just, the point of the phone is to be able to communicate with people, and if you can only communicate one way, then, I may as well go to a call box.
I think you use some near connection points. You see the connection point and use it near that point. I've not actually seen any of the points about in London, I think. Maybe at train stations, airports, that's about it.
Did you know that you can only make outgoing calls from these phones?
No, I didn't. I mean, that's a severe limitation, isn't it? Yeah, that's very severe.
That sounds very interesting.
I'm going to hold it, see what you think.
Quite clever.
What
You just hold it up like so.
Yeah.
And then, right, yeah. Clever. Fits easily into your pocket. I won't keep it.
Yep. Telepoint base stations are sprouting up all over the country, nowhere more so than in London, where a war is being waged for visibility and location. In our street-level survey, we found that although many of the base stations are signposted, they're not even easy to locate from the street map provided. Barry Moxley is the company's managing director. Phone Point's been with us for a year now. Can you call it a success?
I think it's still too early to judge whether the extent of the success. Certainly the interest that we've had has been tremendous, and the size of the phone that fits in your pocket has been tremendously well received by customers. We still have a long way to go in terms of awareness. We have spent a relatively modest amount on advertising deliberately, because we've found that when we've talked to people who are interested, the one thing they wanted to see was more phone points. So we're deliberately keeping our powder dry in that area until we have more phone points available for people to use.
It's not particularly easy to find a base station. What are you doing about that?
Well, I think the simple answer is to have more of them. We produce a map and we produce a directory. What we're working on is increasing the number in central London in particular, so that you'll always be within a few minutes walk of a phone point.
And what about being compatible with the other 3 services? When's that going to happen?
Well, that is part and parcel of a common standard which is available later this year, we believe it'll be on offer. So as of next year, I think you can look forward to a situation where you can use any of the services with the same phone.
Somewhere in the region of £500 or £600.
That one's actually 200.
200.
Do you think that's a good price?
Well, it's still a lot of money. I think it's a lot considering its limitations, yeah.
Do you think you might buy one in the future if there's more of them around?
I think it's a possibility, yeah.
Thanks very much.
You succumb in the end.
Do you think it's a bit more of a status symbol to have a cellular phone, or do you think people won't really mind?
Cellular phone at the moment, definitely. Because I haven't seen any of them about, really.
Don't you think it's more of a status symbol having a cellular phone?
You want to think that, I suppose, yeah, I don't know. I'm not very interested in status symbols. I mean, if it's got a functional value, in other words, you can use it for a reason, then it's good news. Status, who's going to be impressed by that?
Have you ever used a cellular phone?
Yeah, I used to have one.
All right. But
Large
not anymore.
one. Too heavy to carry around. That looks small, compact, ideal.
I wouldn't actually say it is a poor man's cell phone. This is really the first personal communicator. You can use the same phone in the home, in the office, and also now in the street. We're certainly seeing businesses are regarding it as a viable tool to use in their businesses, particularly where cellular, for example, might be too expensive. The running costs a phone point something like a third of what it would cost you to provide a cell phone. So it is a business tool, and it's certainly not the poor man's cellular.
Do you think the market's big enough to have 4 operators, or do you see some falling by the wayside?
Well, it's a question I am sometimes asked, and don't actually think it's useful to speculate. My view is that the market itself will decide. What we have shown from our work to date is that there is tremendous potential out there, and it's really down to us as operators to develop the market so that we develop a viable business. What I can say is that PhonePoint is confident that it can make a viable business out of the service.
Are there really 4 operators up and running out there, Ken?
Well, there are 3 now. We're still waiting for the 4th one, which is the so-called Rabbit phone from the BYPS consortium, Barclays, Philips, Shell, and so on. They actually launched at the Which Computer Show, which we covered, but they're not offering a commercial service yet. So we're still waiting for their network to be available and for them to have the confidence to then go forward and market the phones. Then we'll see 4 out there. We've seen the 3 actually running now.
Is everybody going to band together and form a common service eventually, do you think?
They make a lot of noises about this common service, and it was part of the license that they actually that they have to have a common service by 1991 was the agreement. The problem is that to actually do it in practice is much more difficult than in theory. In practice, they would need to integrate their computer accounting systems, and that means sharing customers, sharing customer information. And most of the cynics are very cynical that will actually occur. We looked at cellular phones arriving 4 years ago. They talked a lot about merging Vodafone and Cellnet, but that never happened, again, probably for commercial reasons.
Will it get easier, do you think, to find the base stations? They're a bit remote at the moment, aren't they?
We had quite a few problems actually driving around the streets finding them. The maps that you have are very miniaturised maps of the London area, for example, and the dots are shown on the map, and you can be within a half-mile range actually looking for it, so that is difficult. They've got to make that easier. Having more base stations in the area itself may not even solve the problem, because you've still got to be within 100 metres to actually use it.
Briefly, raising awareness, what's there still to be done?
Well, PhonePoint mentioned to us that they're hinting at actually giving away phones or doing some special offer with a newspaper, so that may come along, which might excite potential users a little bit.
Let's see how it goes. Anyway, it's probably much up their street. Thanks, Ken. Now it's time for our regular contribution to the programme from the British Computer Society. This week, Ellen Taylor looks at the cost of managing software development and has some surprising figures on just how much it's costing this country.
In 1987, 2 independent reports commissioned by the Department of Trade and Industry examined the way UK software development was being managed from a quality point of view. Both found serious shortcomings and produced estimates of how much this was costing the UK economy. The quite staggering figure of £1 million each working hour finally emerged. It was also suggested that the subject of the studies, IT software systems building, is arguably the most important economic activity in the world. Information systems using IT are at the heart of most economic, social and environmental improvement activity. Something has to be done. So what makes up this enormous figure, and how can we reduce this quite appalling loss? Poor quality software costs money because it often doesn't meet user requirements, it's often inefficiently written, it's difficult to maintain, it often contains both known and unknown errors, it's often late, it's often incompatible with other software. It's well known in other disciplines that many of these problems can be simply addressed by applying well-established and tested quality management principles. The problem is to tailor these principles to software and persuade software developers to use them. In 1988, the DTI asked the BCS to study this problem and come up with ideas. 2 conferences were held, many experts got together, and the various parts of the software and quality industry consulted. The result is the Ticket Initiative, launched formally on the 2nd of July this year. So what is Ticket doing and how can it improve matters? First of all, there's awareness. The concepts of quality management, accreditation and independent certification to international standards is unknown to far too many senior managers. Ticket is going to mount a major awareness programme which will concentrate on the relevance and benefits of third-party quality management certification, specifically to the European standard EN 29000, that is, now the replacement for the BS 5750 standard. Secondly, Ticket will also be looking at guidance, which applies quality management assessment to software. Ticket has just published a document which brings together guidance material from a number of different strands. Thirdly, and in conjunction with the BCS and Institute of Quality Assurance, Ticket is setting up a mechanism to identify and approve qualified ticket auditors. New criteria for the skills and knowledge of these important people have been devised by the BCS. They will form part of its industry structure model performance standards, being updated by the Society now from an earlier version, and may well also form part of a new European informatics skills structure framework, currently under discussion with our EEC partners. By the end of the year, it's expected that the first major group of ticket auditors will have been identified from the 100 or so applicants who have so far come forward. Fourthly, on behalf of the government, the National Accreditation Council for Certification Bodies, NACCB, which is the sole authority for licensing those bodies, which then issue EN 29000 certificates, is planning to introduce new rules which will include reference to this new guidance material and require the use of ticket qualified auditors. If you want to find more about Ticket, contact John Slater at the Ticket Office, 64 Newman Street, London.
Alan Taylor there from the British Computer Society talking about the cost of managing software development. Next week we'll have Tim Hackworth on the programme talking about the Computer Misuse Bill. Well, still to come in this edition of Analysis, we talked to John Davey of the Cable Authority about the future for the industry as a third force phone company. Hugo Dixon of the Financial Times has his say on the future of communications, and in the studio, Harry Everett, Group Marketing Director of Sapphire International, on OS2 and networks. Join us in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Analysis. Later in the programme I'll be talking to Harry Everett about networking in OS2. If you want to call him, don't forget our number is 081 681 5280. I'll just repeat that for you. 081 681 5280. Please phone in. We've got Harry in later.
Serious problems with a Logica system are holding up assembly and refurbishment of the Trident nuclear warhead program. According to a report in today's Computer Weekly, the system, which ensures the safe movement of plutonium at the Atomic Weapons Establishment at Aldermaston, is operating at only 50% capacity. Logica won the £10 million contract for the system in 1986 and has permanent staff based at Aldermaston.
The European Space Agency, the ESA, is to try a satellite communications system that could create the world's first global satellite network. The system will use laser beams to send signals between satellites. With links in space, it may be possible to build satellite-based telephone exchanges which act as relay stations and have the intelligence to select best possible routes. The agency is also researching techniques for sending high-speed data and the use of satellites to support mobile phones.
Unix system supplier Pyramid has improved its top-end transaction processing performance with a new 12-processor system. The new MIS-12T machines are intended for high-use relational database applications and pits the company against rival suppliers, the IBM, DEC, Hewlett-Packard and Sequent. Based on RISC chips, the system will sell at $600,000.
The Royal Bank of Scotland has admitted its computer systems have lost the bank business. In a letter leaked to the Scotsman newspaper, the bank's managing director, Bob Maiden, admitted the bank had fallen behind the competition because of its computer systems. He says considerable resources will be committed to computing in the near future.
Cambridgeshire's County Council's Fair Trading Department has won an action against the 1968 Trade Descriptions Act against UK PC maker Amstrad. The computer company was fined £1,000 following a complaint by a local software house which suggested Amstrad's claims for its LIM 4.0 memory driver were inaccurate. The software house said that although Amstrad claimed its PC2286 machine supported LIM 4.0, it lacked one function, so the company's software would not perform as expected.
IBM has won a multi-million-pound contract to supply equipment for the stock exchange update of its topic news and share price system. The system will allow access to over 3,000 pages of information updated several times a second. The IBM equipment replaces the existing Bishopsgate terminals, which are up to 10 years old at many sites.
Doughty Engineering is to pay up to £36 million to acquire the Danish networking group Dataco. Doughty, who owns Case Communications, will pay an initial £13.6 million for 60% of Dataco's shares, with the rest being acquired over the next 2 years.
Recent statements from Sir Brian Carlsberg at Oftel may at last have brought light to the end of the tunnel for cable operators. Suggestions that BT should carry television pictures and encouragement for the cable operators to carry phone calls will no doubt figure in the duopoly review. Ken Young went to see John David, Director General of the Cable Authority, to assess the industry's future as a third force phone supplier.
We have always advocated the widest possible use of cable. We wanted cable operators to look at the potential for providing telecommunications services as well, and increasingly that has been taken seriously. We now have 3 cable operators who are providing a telephone service, and all the franchises that we have awarded over the last year have had proposals in them for many services other than simple television.
There are 3 cable operators who provide telephony. What are they actually doing with it?
What they are doing primarily is looking for the sort of business market which cannot achieve the sort of deal with British Telecom that a large company could. So they're homing in on the small to medium-sized company, looking for areas where those are concentrated. But I think the experience so far has been very encouraging for cable operators. They have found that they can fairly easily get business customers, and that once they've got them, the revenue that they are generating is rather more than they had expected in their business plan.
Is their aim to undercut British Telecom and Mercury?
What they are doing at the moment is providing a service which is very similar to that which Mercury is offering. So in other words, it will undercut British Telecom, it will provide itemised billing, it will provide a modern digital network, therefore a range of services over and above what people have been getting in the past. As things develop, I think cable operators will be looking for greater freedom to get away from what Mercury are doing at the moment, but at the moment very similar to a Mercury service.
The telecoms review is coming up for grabs. What recommendations are you making to Oftel on that?
What we have suggested to the government is that we ought to look for changes which encourage cable operators to get into the telecommunications business in a very full way. What that means is somehow making this more attractive than it does seem at the moment.
Is the interconnection of cable operators an important point?
Less important, I think, because every cable operator realizes that in providing a telecommunications service, he has to interconnect with the networks of other national operators, BT and Mercury, and therefore the right to interconnect directly with other cable operators may be useful in some cases, but it is of less importance.
Do you really see the day when cable operators are seen as the third force in telecommunications?
Very much so. I think we do see them as a third force. At the moment, it's very much a local third force. So we have two national operators, and we have cable operators as a series of local operators. Obviously, as cable spreads throughout the country, the localness of those will steadily spread, so that most of the country has that third service available to it.
Now, Oftel is preoccupied at the moment with cable franchisees that haven't started to actually open up their networks. What's your position on that?
Obviously, anybody who gets a cable franchise from us has succeeded in convincing us that they are going to provide a good service. We need to hold them to that, and holding them to it means that we need to hold them to building their network on a timetable that they have laid down in their application, and that's something that Oftel is now doing through the enforcement action that it announced last week.
British Telecom is withdrawing its investment in cable. Is that bad for the industry?
I don't think it's bad news for the development of cable, because there are plenty of other people who are happy to step into BT's shoes and to pick up where BT have left off. What it means for BT is less definite. I'm not entirely sure what BT's strategy now is, because I would have thought that it would make sense for BT to assure themselves a place in the cable industry. They are voluntarily giving that up, and I think that's surprising.
Sapphire International, the PC database supplier, conducts an annual survey of its registered customers to find out what their buying patterns are for the coming year. This year's survey looked at networking. The responses the company gets from the survey reveal quite a number of interesting trends. Clive now talks to the Group Marketing Manager, Harry Everett.
Harry Everett, Sapphire International, many thanks for joining us this morning.
That's okay.
Your survey, what were the main conclusions of the survey?
Well, I think we found there's been a lot of speculation over the last few years about OS2 and about Unix. Will OS2, will Unix replace DOS? I think our survey reinforces what a number of observers have concluded, that in the short term it won't. In the long term it may, and we're not offering long-term conclusions by a survey, we're offering very short-term, what will happen in the next year. But certainly in the next year it would appear that OS2 is not going to make particularly great leaps forward. Unix doesn't appear to. DOS is still preeminent, and networks are moving ever forward.
How do you know your survey is representative of the market as a whole?
Well, Sapphire International have been around in the PC marketplace since 1979, which makes us a pretty long-standing company. We're very successful with our premier product, Data Ease. We feel that our customer base is pretty representative. It's constituted of many large corporates, indeed, say 80% of the top 100 companies in the country. But it ranges through to even the smallest organisations, the corner shop. We feel that having looked at the sort of breakdown of industry and looked at the breakdown of our responses to the survey, we feel pretty confident, and we measure it against other surveys as well to see what their findings are. We feel it's pretty representative.
Why are users more concerned with networking, do you think?
Well, they've got to look at the cost-saving benefits of use of multiple applications. Unix, for example, has been heralded over many years as the forthcoming year of Unix. Every year, I think, for the last 10 years has been the year of Unix. I mean, it's a 20-year-old operating system now. I think networking offered cost savings. It offered an easier installation. It rode on the back of DOS. DOS is the preeminent operating system on the PC. De facto, PC networks become a standard.
Just as important, though, something like 40.3% of your respondents actually have made up their mind not to install a network. I mean, it's very difficult to know why, but in terms of speculation, what's your personal opinion of why they would?
Well, I would believe from that either that they're decided to stick with single-user applications. Some of them may have decided to go to Unix, although I doubt that for a company-wide. But what is interesting is that if you look at very large organisations, the majority of those have some form of networking installed in the company. So I would think the majority of those that haven't got networking installed would find in the smaller organisations.
Obviously, OS2 has been lauded as the major all bells and whistles, singing and dancing success to DOS, really. I mean, why do you think it hasn't really taken off in quite the way it should have done?
Well, we wondered that ourselves. I think we should explain to the people looking at this interview that our survey is conducted in 2 phases. What we're talking about today is the phase that was conducted using a personal postal questionnaire, I should say. But we do a follow-up, which is a telephone interview, and based on the previous year's survey, we did a follow-up telephone interview where we asked the questions about OS2 and what were the reasons. Now, there's been a lot of speculation that the reason that OS2 hadn't really taken off was the lack of application software. And I think IBM were putting it around that certainly once there was a large portfolio of application software, OS2 would take off. That was only the 4th reason in terms of people considering why they haven't taken OS2 on board. The major one was they perceive no advantage over DOS.
I was going to say, what do you think are the major benefits of OS2? I mean,
right.
What would you say they were, if there are any?
Okay, I mean, the major benefits that have been propounded for the product is its ability for multitasking, its ability to fit into the SAA architecture for IBM. It gives you an intro into long-term IBM developments. It also works very efficiently. Again, I'm not talking, I must at this point say that Sapphire have no particular axe to grind in terms of any operating system. We're only reporting what we find. But there do seem to be some advantages for OS2, but there also seem to be some disadvantages. One of the ones reported again by our respondents was the actual cost of switching to OS2, and the fact that they consider they have a lot of money invested in DOS, and is it really worth the switch? And then 4th was the lack of application software. So we would conclude from that perhaps IBM and Microsoft should address themselves to a bigger education program over what the benefits are of OS2. Perhaps that hasn't been got across to the user, who still sees that DOS works adequately on their machines. They can't really see any particular advantage. And then along comes Windows. Windows seems to offer some of the advantages that IBM and Microsoft were talking about, and Windows is also a Microsoft product, which also creates one can conclude they're offering 2 operating systems. Which ones are they backing?
We'll go into that in just a second. I'm talking to Harry Everett, Group Marketing Manager of Sapphire International. The phone lines are now open. If you'd like to pose questions to him, someone will in a minute tell me what the phone number is for you to ring, and it's 081 681 5280. 081 681 5280. Harry, in terms of where Windows and OS2 fit, I mean, how are Microsoft selling both products, and where do they fit into the grand plan of things?
Well, I mean, I was checking some figures on the sales, for example, of OS2 to date. 200,000 seems to be a figure that's been recently reported, which isn't a great amount when you compare it with sort of like 10 million units for DOS, which was contained in the same report. Windows, well, we can't really get figures on how effectively Windows is selling, but Microsoft themselves seem to suggest that they're selling in many, many, many thousands a month since the release of Windows 3. Okay, fine. The advantages between Windows and OS2 really is in the eye of the user. Now, if you put yourself in the position of a user who's using DOS, well, Windows is a DOS-based product. Therefore, it's not a great move. There's not such a big hardware commitment. It will run on 286, whereas really you need a 386 machine to run OS2. So you haven't got the big hardware investment that's required. Okay, there's supposedly memory management problems with Windows, but then there's supposedly some problems with OS2 as well. There's also some problems with DOS. So there's problems with all operating systems. Perhaps it's better the devil you know than maybe the next one that's around the corner.
Do you think Microsoft are really positioning it wrongly at OS2 in the market at the moment? Obviously, they've got to clear with
I
Windows
wouldn't
3,
presume to answer on behalf of Microsoft. I can only answer on behalf of Sapphire. But to speculate, I would say that they were backing two horses. Whichever one wins, they will benefit.
Very, very briefly, the findings of Unix you found was very much a niche operating system. Do you think that'll continue?
I think so, in the short term. But again, if you read, as we do, we sort of keep records of various surveys that are conducted, and there is such a spectrum of opinion over whether Unix is going to be the operating system of the 90s. Some people forecasting 50 to 60% market penetration, which amazes me, and some people saying it will be as low as 5%. Now, when you've got a span of opinions like that, it's very difficult, and it must be extremely difficult for software developers.
Okay, we'll take a very brief break, and we'll come back to it at the moment. Just to repeat the number, 081 681 5280 if you'd like to phone in and put your questions to Harry Elliott from Sapphire International. Now, Ken.
Now, earlier in the programme, we looked at the development of PhonePoint as one of the new boys in the expanding personal communications market. But as the duopoly review looms, the industry and its commentators are only too keen to wage the publicity battle. In Viewpoint this week, Hugo Dixon, telecommunications correspondent of the Financial Times, has his say.
One of the most important issues Peter Lilly, the new Trade and Industry Secretary, will have to tackle over the next few months is how to introduce more competition into the telecommunications market. The government can be satisfied with the radical telecommunications policy it embarked upon in the early 1980s. Britain now has 5 times as many users of mobile phones as West Germany or France. Equipment prices are low by European standards, and industry enjoys a plethora of data services. But as Mr. Lilly prepares for a major review of telecommunications policy in November, he would be wrong to rest on these laurels. The basic phone service is still far from perfect, with customers complaining they are not being treated efficiently and courteously, and with people being charged between 2 and 3 times costs for international calls. When the government privatised British Telecom and set Mercury Communications up as its rival, it stopped short of initiating a completely free market in telecommunications. The two companies were granted monopoly rights to provide basic phone services, to give the former time to adjust to a commercial environment and the latter time to build its network. This duopoly policy is the best known restriction to competition in the telecommunications market, but it is not the only one. Instead of allowing anybody to enter the market, the government has developed a system of licensing by magic numbers. It divides the overall market into various segments, basic services, cellular, satellite and so on, decides how many companies should play in each bit, and then picks the players. Mr. Lilly should abandon licensing by magic numbers and throw open the market to whoever wishes to play in it. This would, of course, not result in an infinite number of companies entering the market. Because of economies of scale, each segment would only be able to support a limited number of players. However, the number and identity of those players would be determined by the market itself rather than government policy. Entrepreneurial companies would flourish, and BT would have to improve its service or face losing its customers. As well as removing barriers to entry, Mr. Lilly should strengthen the regulatory process to ensure that BT does not abuse its dominant position to blunt the challenge of new rivals. Initially, competitors will concentrate on niche markets instead of building integrated nationwide networks, meaning they will only be able to offer a full range of services if they can interconnect their networks with BT's. This means the government should ensure that new competitors are able to interconnect smoothly with BT. It is worth remembering that Mercury's progress has been held back by disputes with BT over interconnection. One way of preventing BT abusing its power would be to break it up into different companies, concentrating on local, long-distance, international, and mobile services. This option, which was pioneered in the US and has been threatened in Japan, is probably off the agenda. But many of the same goals could be achieved by forcing the company to split itself into separate subsidiaries, with any transactions between them on an arm's-length basis. Mr. Lilly should also promote greater openness in the way that the Office of Telecommunications regulates the industry. At present, nobody is in a position to challenge Oftel's decisions because they are taken behind closed doors and the information on which they are based is not published. The government's first round of liberalisation has enhanced Britain's position in the telecommunications market. Mr. Lilly is in an excellent position to push liberalisation firmly through to the second stage.
Hugo Dixon from the Financial Times on the Duopoly Review. I have with me in face-to-face this week Harry Everett from Sapphire International. Our phone lines are open for you to ask any question within reason you like on OS2 and networking. The number to ring is 081 681 5280. I'll repeat that for you. 081 681 5280. Harry, Unix. Where's it going in terms of the sort of replies to your survey? Some trends suggest it's a niche operating system, but really, what are its benefits and why are people using it now then?
Well, we would conclude that people primarily are using Unix, as say, for excuse me, for specific applications and not corporate-wide.
What sort of applications?
Well, probably engineering, maybe CAD/CAM, maybe some scientific type application. It depends on the nature. It's incidentally interesting that probably local government and local authorities are bigger users of Unix in this country than commercial companies. One can conclude from that they have certain scientific, certain engineering, possibly a lot of CAD/CAM type applications. One of the factors militating against the spread of Unix was obviously cost, but reports are that Unix boxes are coming down in price. But then again, so are DOS-based PCs coming down in price. So as one comes down, the other comes down. So cost will be a factor. But I think one's got to conclude there's a considerable sort of inertia in the DOS market itself. And if we take the analogy of a supertanker, takes how many miles? I can't remember, but how many miles does it take to actually stop a supertanker and turn it round? And I think the DOS market is very much like that in terms of spread across the corporations in this country. And it's going to take a considerable while to actually achieve that turnaround to a different operating system. And whilst there are a number of operating systems competing, and we've all seen the articles that say OS2 versus Unix, PC versus PC-DOS versus OS2, etc., etc., there is a lot of hype, a lot of self-interest that's invested by the manufacturers. I really wonder whether there's the sort of right sort of service provided to the user to enable them to make decisions, and perhaps we're wrong to a degree to feature and focus too heavily on operating systems, and perhaps we should look at applications and the solutions, because after all, operating systems are really no more than the means to run application software, and perhaps the user's actually interested in the application software, and perhaps there's a lot more application software on DOS than there are on Unix or OS2, and that may be a reason that's extending the life of DOS.
So you would really advise customers to think application and not operating system?
Well, certainly as a supplier of application software, I would say yes, there is a vested interest. But that does make sense, surely, that you look at the application first rather than the operating system.
So why do you think there's been such debate on the operating system arena if applications are more important?
Because I think that debate has been fueled to a degree by interested companies who supply operating systems and the boxes on which those operating systems run. I mean, don't forget these days we're talking about the IBM backing OS2, also IBM backing Unix.
Obviously a great interest in the way applications are distributed throughout a company, very much in terms of SQL, the SQL language. What sort of response did you get from the SQL side of your survey?
Right. Because of the announcement in the sort of last 18 months about database engines, servers, I mean, again, a lovely set of buzzwords appear in a lot of computer speculation and talk about engines and servers. But as a company, we provide, or will be providing, a product called DataEase SQL, which will be a front end to database servers. So obviously, we are interested in finding out what people's intentions are. So this year we asked, this year we asked the question: do you intend to purchase SQL servers? And we had a response, and over 12% of people have said, yes, we do. That was quite interesting, because that was almost as good as the response of people who said they're planning to install Unix and OS2. And this is a burgeoning marketplace. And if you look at the amount of people who say yes on our survey to PC to mini mainframe connectivity, pretty catch-all type question on the survey, but it covers all the ways of connecting to mainframes and minis. That's very high. I mean, that's 40-odd% of people. So it shows an intention to get to grips with distributed databases, cooperative processing throughout an organisation. But we followed that questionnaire up with a series of seminars addressing the topic, not specifically addressing our product, but addressing the topic where IBM were guest presenters, and we guested at IBM seminars. And from that, we got a feedback of people's interest. And it was 60% of the people who attended that were very, very committed, which is, and this was a broad spread of major companies and senior people, senior decision-making people within those companies. So I think people are looking at it and saying, okay, let's try and pull the threads together now.
How does this distributed approach to computing and the use of databases on different servers and having access to them with SQL, how does it work, and how is it being taken up by companies?
Well, at the moment, we would...
From an application supplier's point of view, obviously.
Exactly, yeah. At the moment, I mean, our interest is because we supply a front end. We don't supply the server software, but we will be supplying a front end to it. But at the moment, companies seem to be taking up, basically as a pilot, to look at how this is going to affect the organisation, how they can better control of data, better management of their data. Because don't forget, a lot of companies have got what would be called critical data, important data to the company, now spread around on PCs because of the proliferation of PCs over the years. A lot of very important data is split on a number of remote PCs, and some people can't get access to the data that's on the other PCs, and that doesn't aid their decision making. They see this as a route to achieve that. Also, it's better data manipulation. It's better report writing, so you'll be able to actually access using SQL that information much quicker and faster. Better security at the server level, faster and better processing. So there are considerable benefits, but as always, there is a cost factor to take on board as well.
Quite a lot of complicated things to digest there. Harry Everett from Sapphire International, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Ken.
Well, that's about all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our guest, Harry Everett of Sapphire International. Next week's dossier programme follows neatly on from our discussions with Harry. It's about local area networks against multi-user systems. If you'd like to receive that programme, then call Nick Bancroft at Computer Channel Sales. He's on 071 730 2222. That's 071 730 2222. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with analysis at the same time next week. Goodbye.